What's going on, everyone? It's Mitch from RespectWords.com back with another episode of the Morning Joint, joined by co-host Dani WestCoast. How you doing today, Dani?
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I was out last week, was dealing with a little bit of sickness. As you know, there's still COVID, among other things, out in the world. So be careful, be safe, keep washing your hands, and keep resting if you need to. That's what I did, and I feel amazing today. So whoop, whoop.
Water and rest and cannabinoids, you know?
Yes. Full infusion, mainlining cannabinoids for the. I'm just kidding. Just kidding, folks. But definitely taking a couple days to rest and recharge helped me so much. So if you're feeling sick, I highly recommend don't go into work. Just stay on your couch as long as you need to. It helps.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And don't get into my situation where you have a kid in daycare and then you're just gonna consistently be sick, man. There's no escaping it at this point. So first up today on Cannabis News, man, we dropped an article. Uncle Arnie's California cannabis beverage brand is currently, well, not just California, they're also online in Oregon and doing their investor raise right now to break into some new markets. But they're currently owning seven of the top 10 selling cannabis beverage SKUs in the state of California, making them the top cannabis brand in the state and one of, if not the top selling brand nationwide, just out of their sales from California, which is pretty impressive. Beverages has been a unique sector that has gotten a lot of hype over the last few years. A lot of people think that this is going to be the largest category in cannabis as we progress through legalization. And there's some cases that I see, for that I agree with. If we see, low dose beverages in like a Whole Foods and grocery stores, right next to the alcohol center, alcohol area, I feel like that could be one of the top selling SKUs within cannabis. Until that section, I'm still going to be long on flower. But I still believe the growth for this industry and the category is incredible nonetheless. But what's unique is, we kind of see the two sides of the spectrum. We see your low dose beverages targeting the Canna Curious, and we see kind of what Arnies is, which goes for a legacy consumer, 100 milligram beverage. One of their top selling beverages is kind of a little shot that's 100 milligrams. So even if you're still microdosing that, you're still probably taking a 10 to 40, 50 milligrams at a time, which is a micro for a legacy type consumer, not a micro for your Canna Curious crowd. But it's unique just seeing all of the brands go after the Canna Curious and the hype around this sector, yet we see the high dose being the leading selling SKU. I mean, 7 of the top 10 SKUs. Dani, I know you've worked at all facets of this industry. What's kind of your take on this low dose versus high dose and kind of the market opportunity for each side of the spectrum in beverage?
Right. So, firstly, I am a big fan of Uncle Arnie's. I love even when you go into like certain retailers, they have some really cool retail merchandising. I come from a marketing background, so I always kind of a retail marketing background, so I love to pay attention to those kinds of things. So I give them big props there. When it comes to drinks as a whole, I'm just a little bit confused, however, because I just want to know who came up with that projection that drinks were going to be the most popular product ever. That's been something I've been hearing since recreational started in California. At least recreational has been around a bit longer for you, Mitch, based in Washington. But in California, 2016, 2017, that's when I started hearing more talking about beverages being this next big thing. Coming from working in a dispensary during medical days, I would see that there would be times we would have beverages and literally we wouldn't sell one all week. So it was just a little bit odd to me that beverages became such a hyped focal point of the cannabis space when I really just don't see that for myself. Then we have brands like Uncle Arnie's that do emerge and they are killing it and they do have the numbers to back it up. But I'm just wondering as a whole, like who came up with that? Who's the one that typed that into the internet one day and said, "No, beverages are going to be the next big cannabis thing," when flower is definitely the top. Like edibles are a small sector, dabs are a small sector. I do think smokables and flower will continue to be the biggest sector until maybe we get some sort of federal legalization that can put these these products inside of a grocery store. But personally, I don't really like when things are predicated on federal legalization. That's a long road, to be totally honest with you. I mean, we just had the federal court of appeals state that this lady tried to sue her employer, essentially cannabis employer, and she was told she could not win this lawsuit because under like the RICO Act, cannabis is still federally illegal. So we have such a long road. I don't like when things are predicated on federal legalization. And I'm just wondering who came up with that projection that beverages would be so great. But don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great beverages out there. I think one thing that's really cool about Uncle Arnie's is they still offer that 100 milligram beverage in the small shot. I'm very health conscious. I don't like consuming a lot of sugar. So this is one really great way to get a fast acting edible like a drink without having so much sugar and still getting that full like 100 milligram punch. So I really like this brand and everything. I'm not trying to put anyone down, but just drinks as a whole, I'm so confused. So if we can ever get anyone on here to explain that to me, anyone in the comments, please, you could DM me, Dani WestCoast. I just wanna know like who came up with that.
Yeah, I've been vocal about that as well, where I'm big on this sector. I'm big on cannabis in general, as I know you are, and I'm big on the sector of drinks, but sometimes those headlines are a little bit out of touch with what I see and even seem overly optimistic. Well, I know I'm not ignorant enough to know what's been, 5-10 years ago is going to be different than today, and 5 to 10 years from today, and 5 to 10 years from today will be different from today. So I know that there's going to be some things that change, but yeah, I don't necessarily see where a lot of these headlines go. I don't believe in it that much, but again, if how much I believe in cannabis and see growth in any sector, especially the non-smokable, because as we think of cannabis, that's obviously kind of the bread and butter. So as we move away from smokable cannabis, all the different forms, I think, and I include vape in that, I think there's obviously immense room for growth in all of those categories. And like you mentioned too, I'm personally a big fan of the 100 milligram drinks. Very irregularly am I drinking all 100 milligrams, but much like you, I'm not as health conscious likely, but I just don't drink soda and stuff. It's not necessarily a health thing. I just don't really, I'm a weird person. I just enjoy water. But I like when I have a 100 milligram drink. Yeah, I finished mine, but my glass is right there. But I like to shake up, the 100 milligram drink and just take a couple sips of it. If it's, I like the drink additives where I can mix it with something else, or I like, like the Arnies and things like that, where I can just take, a cool little 30, 40 milligrams to the head with for me, it seems like honestly a little sip. And I really like to be able to dose like that, where I don't need to consume a whole bag of gummies. I don't need to drink 3 12-ounce, seltzers, right? I can just have a couple sips of something that tastes good. And obviously, anytime you mix with the 100 milligrams, we said this on our product reviews, anytime you have 100 milligrams, you're not really able to fully mask the taste of cannabis. You're going to have the taste of cannabis in at that kind of dosage. But an Arnie's and a couple of these drinks in that category make it where it's not bad. It's not like eating, again, I'll still eat them, but when you have a 100 milligram brownie, you bite it and you're like, wow, this tastes like I'm eating dry flour in a brownie, right? It's not an attractive taste.
I will also say, as the economy kind of goes in this roller coaster heading towards, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but we are heading towards a recession. It will be interesting to see how the cannabis consumer is affected by that, if we'll continue to want more bang for your buck. So if it, starts to become like, I could get this drink, it's 100 milligrams and it's $17, or I could get this one that's, 50 milligrams and it's also $17. Which one am I going to choose? As we start kind of heading into this financial recession, it'll be interesting.
Yeah. And that's Arnie's, I think, has the the high dose for the value to the consumer, which again, if you look at the data, whether we're looking at flower and the phenomenon with THC percentage that go there, whether you agree with it or not, the trend that data shows exactly what you're talking about. Even without a recession, people buy kind of with value in mind. I get more. And I think that's the big issue behind the THC percentages. I'm getting more bang for my buck, less than, I'm going to get super high. It's right. I'm going to buy the highest THC for whatever my budget, because I feel as if I'm getting more for what I'm spending, similarly to drink. So I think it's very, even with all the hype, even with all the low dose, when you look at the actual data, the people that are, again, it's unique in the sense that not many people are doing it, but it shouldn't be unique in the sense that the person that's like, hey, we're going to service the consumer that spends the most on cannabis, and this is what they want. They want high dose for low cost, and that's what we're going to serve to them. It's not surprising that that's seven of the top 10 selling drinks in California, but it is surprising that not other people kind of see like, oh, 1+1=2. Let's follow that formula. It's
Right.
it's pretty unique. But moving on, Uncle Arnie's crushing it. If you guys check that out, we have the article about that they claim 7 of the top 10 selling SKUs right now, and they're doing a unique crowdfunding seed invest round. You can check that out in the article in there. The next topic. So we did an interview a couple weeks back. Our friend Devon from Drops Media and Hip Hop DX, a partner of ours that we work with on content, interviewed the Gumbo team, Luca Brasi and his wife Alexis Major, the founders and owners behind the Gumbo brand, as well as Moneybagg Yo, which is famous artist, been repping Gumbo pretty heavy. And so if you are been tapped into New York, kind of legacy gray market cannabis, Gumbo has been a brand and a strain that's been buzzing over the last couple of years. They've inked a partnership with Cookies in 2021 to distribute their product in California. And they're actually out in Thailand right now with Cookies launching out there. So the Gumbo brand is launching underneath the Cookies umbrella, getting a kind of big distribution. So a lot of people are just now becoming aware of this brand. But they've been around for a while. Again, if you listen to hip hop, Gumbo's been dropped by a lot of artists for a while. And then just going out to New York, when we were out in New York last spring, it was definitely a lot of the local connoisseurs. It was being name dropped. When we're at a couple of the underground dispensaries, I definitely saw people were like, what new flavors do you have? And they were like, I need that Gumbo added to my cart. I need that. But what else is there? I heard that from people. So I know it's had a little bit of some validity to it. I tried the California drop. It's definitely a nice flavor. It's kind of in that unique sherb gelato somewhere in there, man. It's playing off those familiar things. But the Gumbo brand is unique. It's owned by husband and wife, black owned business, which is rare in cannabis, especially being a multi-state, now being sold on both coasts and international. So it's definitely a unique story that they got going on there. And both of them have kind of a unique background. Luca Brasi's got a background in just business, music, entertainment, and so does Alexis. I know you were reading a little bit about her, Dani. What's your take? Have you tried the strain or anything yet? The Madison Square Gumbo in California yet?
I have not had the chance to try that yet, unfortunately. I will say people have their mixed opinions about Cookies, but Cookies takes on very select partners. They're not just going to let anybody partner with them. And I feel like they do a really great job at partnering with people who have cultural significance as well as an amazing product. In doing a little bit of research about the founders, it does sound like I discovered some really cool stuff actually about Alexis Major. So she was actually a former manager for NFL players, and one of the reasons that she was into starting this cannabis brand, it was from seeing so many of the NFL players fall victim to opioid addiction and dependence. So cannabis, obviously, as we know, a really great way to manage pain and to manage anxiety and stress without all of these crazy opioids or benzodiazepines, things like that. So I found that really, really interesting. It was an article in Forbes about Gumbo and about her and her husband. So really, really cool stuff. And I love, again, when you have cultural significance and a great product, it's just a wonderful recipe for success. So I can't wait to try the Madison Square Gumbo. I do love that name as well. I'm always down for a unique strain name.
They're getting after it. Yeah. And so obviously, there's a little bit more, like you said, there's a lot of ties between, cannabis and sports, and especially moving into this new era where the stigma, legalization has helped the stigma around cannabis get lowered. And we're seeing ex-athletes and even current athletes endorse cannabis, whether it's through CBD and the minor cannabinoids or all the way to THC, Kevin Durant obviously came out, in the interview with David Letterman, claiming he was high during the interview, and he's obviously an investor in a couple different companies in the cannabis space while being an active NBA player. So we're seeing a lot of shifts and changes. And I know you recently did an Instagram. So let's break down for us, Dani, kind of the relationship you're seeing right now between legal cannabis and sports right now.
Totally. So companies, cannabis brands, small and large, more and more former athletes are either taking a stand, like speaking for cannabis, or they're starting brands, collaborating, or investing in cannabis. In doing my video, one of the most interesting things that I found during my research, I had no idea that Joe Montana is such a high investor in cannabis. He has a $75 million investment in Caliva. That one just kind of flew under the radar, right? Obviously, there's some current brands like Heisman, which was started by Ricky Williams. We have Dwayne Wade collaborating with brands such as Jeter. So there are Mike Tyson, for example, with Tyson Ranch. So many athletes are getting on board with cannabis. Major League Baseball is probably the biggest league to embrace cannabis. And I think it's because Major League Baseball has also been plagued with so much addiction amongst their athletes. I forget the name. I think it was Tyler Skaggs, I want to say, was a baseball player who OD'd and passed away due to addiction with opioids. After that, about a year later, we saw a lot of collective bargaining agreements. So collective bargaining agreements are really players' unions when they negotiate for their contracts. If you're not into sports, like you might not know that for all of those listening who might not be super into sports. But during their latest round of collective bargaining agreements, that was a huge thing from players' unions, was to either do away with mandatory cannabis testing or to lighten punishments for mandatory cannabis testing. So Major League Baseball, the NBA, the UFC, and a couple other leagues have all either done away with cannabis testing requirements or just super lessened the punishments for them. Major League Baseball used to get a $35,000 fine, mandatory treatment sentence, and suspended for the season if you were caught with cannabis in your system. Now, Charlotte's Web CBD is a official sponsor of Major League Baseball. The NFL is still a league that does test players. However, they only test players during the first 2 weeks of training. They've increased their threshold from 30 NG. I don't know I think that might stand for nanograms. Please don't quote me on this, but it's how they're measuring the presence of cannabis in your blood or urine. It's measured NG per milliliter, but they've increased that from 30 all the way up to 150. So you can have cannabis in your system. It just can't be a crazy amount for the NFL players, and they're not doing the crazy suspensions or fines with that. So we're seeing some very positive movements, and for sports, I do think it is this really big push to get players away from opioids, as we're seeing that obviously those are extremely dangerous, yet they are prescribed like crazy. I don't know. I touched on this 2 weeks ago. Opioids, pain relief medications, cannabis, alcohol, a really weird little history. Some might lean into some conspiracy theories when thinking about all of those topics together, but it has been a really weird road that cannabis has been the less medically legitimate one, and it is now slowly creeping its way back into being seen as totally medically legitimate for pain management, as we all anecdotally know.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we'll see more research into that. I also do want to add that the NFL donated $1 million towards medical cannabis research. They gave that to San Diego State University to fund medical and clinical kind of research there. So seeing some really great things. Thank you, sports players, because helping to end the stigma, we need all the help we can get.
Absolutely. And that's one of the best ways to do it at a mainstream level when you look at celebrities, not celebrities, sports players, because, regardless of political affiliation, I think everybody enjoys sports. Everybody looks to these people, whether it's role models or examples of what one can do, right? To be a professional athlete, you have to be both physically and mentally very sharp and performing at a very high level. So if someone is able to do that successfully and be at the top of their craft while also be an advocate for cannabis, that can definitely change people's perspective, right? Some people are going to be non-receptive to that, but it's definitely a little bit more receptive than someone that's your stereotypical stoner, right? Being pro cannabis is not going to change someone's mind, whereas someone that might buy into the stigma that if you smoke weed, you're lazy or you can't perform at the top of your craft. When you look at someone who's quite literally at the peak of athletic performance out of all the individuals in the globe and is sharp and ready and prepared every single week on a weekly or whatever their basis of playing is publicly. And it's pretty hard to argue that cannabis makes a person lazy or, not work hard or something, right? When that's an example of a cannabis consumer. So they definitely help us break the stigma.
There's some really interesting research that's also come out. If anyone listening would like to Google it, there's some really interesting studies that have recently come out that found that people who consume cannabis actually exercise for longer than people who did not, and obviously found the act of exercising more enjoyable. One thing I do want to mention, the Olympic Union, whatever, they're still very anti-cannabis. So it'll be really interesting to see how some of these league players are affected during any sort of Olympics kind of things. Like we saw Sha'Carri Richardson was unable to participate in the Tokyo Olympics. However, an athlete found with actual doping chemicals in their body was able to participate. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the Olympics kind of plays into that too.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Moving on into cannabis news. So we did a strain feature on the orange Chemeleon strain from Berkshire roots in Massachusetts. So while we were traveling around on the North American Weed Tour, we visited quite a bit of facilities, tried quite a bit of products. This was one of the strains that really stood out to Joey and myself while in Massachusetts. So it's the Orange Chem or Orange Chemeleon from Berkshire Roots is one of their staple strains. Upon touring their grow, when you walk into a room and that's one of the strains in that room, it really takes over that room smell-wise. And that strain is sold in, flower, pre-roll, and it's also made into their vapes. And they had a disposable vape that we tried from one of their stores that was one of the most memorable vapes on the entire North American Weed Tour. This orange chem strain, I believe it was just a distillate with cannabis derived terps in it, and I'm not a tangy, I'm not a big orange person, but when you mix orange and like gas or orange and funk, that hits me somewhere where I enjoy. And this is definitely that orangey gas. I love smelling the flower, I love smoking the flower, but the vape version of this strain was just, it really, really stood out compared to quite a bit of vapes. I think a lot of vapes, it's hard for the flavor profile and the taste to move over sometimes. Sometimes it can be pretty seamless and sometimes it can be a little different. You get different elements in the vape and then you feel like the flower, but this one was just absolutely excellent. So definitely check out that product review. It's a great product coming out of Massachusetts of all places. They got some fire out there, man.
Do you like lemon strains, Mitch? I know you just said you're not usually
similarly. If it is a lemon gas or lemon funk, like I don't really like GMO, but if you mix the right GMO and lemon, I really like that. And then, I had a lemon gelato or something I really liked. And then like your slightly piney lemony OG Kushes I like, but I'm not like a lemon haze. I do not like that. I do not enjoy that at all.
There's a difference. It would be really cool to see like the terpenes on those two, because I know lemon strains are usually very heavy in terpenoline, and I seem to really like terpenoline. I forget which terp the orange strains generally are higher in, but I'm not a huge fan of generally orange either. So I'd be very interested to try this strain that you speak of, the orange that we might both like.
Yeah. It's like I said, I'm not big on just the straight orange, or the tangies don't usually capture me. But when you mix it with that funk and that gas, again, whether it's lemony or orange, that citrus and gas, that's a hard one for me to dislike. But yes, we were talking to True Terpenes. We're going to talk to them later this week. They apparently have some machine in their headquarters where they like you put it on your mask, mouth. It's like a sensory thing, and they blast terpenes, and you obviously not smoking or anything, but you like inhale like all the flavors and stuff. And so they're talking about how you can take your favorite strain and it breaks it into the different components come at different times. So it's not all the strain at once. So it almost like breaks down the strain and you can get all the different components. And then in my mind, if you take like 5 strains you like, you might find that common denominator, like, oh, that's actually you know what I mean? Like, this is the terpene I like. That's the terpene I don't like. And you find the mixes of them or something. So I'm excited. We got a standing invite to go try this, hook our faces up to this terpene blaster thing. And I'm looking forward. I don't know when we're going down there, but I'm looking forward to it. Next up on cannabis news. So RMR Legacy Smalls, our cannabis line in California, is now available at Elevate in Lompoc, up north on the north of LA, between LA and the Bay on the coastline. We're available $40 at Elevate. Check that out, man. Great partner of ours. Shout out Elevate. I think they've already purchased a couple orders of our stuff. So check that out. Rolling into music. So I'm going to run through some of this stuff quick. If anyone wants to check them out more, you can click the links. But we have a new Music Friday from around the PNW. Our head editor, Taylor Hart, put that together. There's some dope music on there, including Travis Thompson did a little freestyle presented by The Bakery, one of our favorite dispensaries out here in Seattle, and produced at Ruby Room by Nima Schemes and Elon Wright. I almost combined their names there. That's super dope little series that they're doing. Travis is one of the bright stars out of Seattle, so definitely check that out. We also have a list of the best EDM releases so far in 2023. I know it's only just been 1 month, but Skrillex is back. There's a lot of new music coming out, so definitely check that out. We got another feature, Pontiac Promises from Seafood Sam, Long Beach native, a new song. Check that out. And then also this weekend was the 38th year anniversary for Run DMC King of Rock album, their second album, but one that really not just put them on the map, but really took hip hop mainstream. So that's an iconic moment in history. Can't believe that album came out before I was born, but also that shows that hip hop has not been popular for about the time I've been on this earth. Hip hop has been popular, which is weird to think about in a couple of ways. It makes me think hip hop is not that old, and damn, I'm old at the same time.
And a lot can happen in a short amount of time. The evolution of hip hop has been, quite something since its start. Side note, I got a record player, and it has kind of been, I've only had it for like a week now, 2 weeks, but it kind of changes your relationship with music, because now with streaming, you could just skip songs that you don't like, but the record player, you have to listen to the full thing. And it's such an enjoyable experience. So if anyone out there, if you have access, I highly recommend like taking that trip down memory lane, listening to either the full albums all the way through or getting yourself a record player.
And the sound, it's a little fuzzy. Yeah. We call it, sonically it's warm is what they call it, but it sounds great. And it's weird, even though the technology is obviously older, now with digital and mixing and compressing stuff down, you can kind of hear all of the different channels of music a lot cleaner. But here's something, if you're listening to an older record, if it's released newer, it won't be that. But if you find something, if you got something from the 70s or especially the 60s here, I don't know if you can, but if you have 2 different speakers, if you turn one off, or if you can pan it left or right for you, you can hear. So how they used to mix records, like now when we mix stuff, like you have the sound field, right? I mean, it's my passion, but it's left and right and center, right? And a lot of stuff is mixed to where you hear it across the whole sound field. But a lot of old stuff was mixed where they would take like the horns or something and put them like right here. So if you turn off the right or turn off the left, you might miss, like you might not even hear any vocals, or you might be missing complete instruments just because the way they mix. So sometimes it's a weird way. If you have some old records, if you pan it or turn off your speakers, you can kind of hear how the record was put together with what they did as technology at that time. So I got a lot of records. I'm a nerd, man. So
hey, I'll give that a try. Cool.
So definitely better days. I used to have to drive 2 hours to a record store, and then you couldn't peep them. So you had to buy records based on what the cover looked like. And then you go, and like you said, you couldn't skip. So you had to manually move the needle down.
Mhm.
And so I remember a lot of times buying records off the cover alone, and like when you got it completely wrong, or when you picked a fire record based on how it looked, it was definitely a love-hate relationship, man, for sure. But that's it for the morning joint today. Appreciate everyone hanging out with us. We'll be back every Monday. And again, most of these topics are covered in our newsletter sent out Monday morning. So make sure you subscribe to that. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us, man. We'll be back next week.